why I took this project on. I'm going to be doing a lot of decades if I make it that far, because by the time I get to the end, it'll be probably 2020 or something like that. I'm going to do 3 this year. I'm doing this one tonight, and a couple months away I'll be doing the 1900s, and then in the spring I'll be doing the 1910s. And then next fall I'll be starting in the 1920s and in the 30s and 40s and so forth. The reason I got this idea was that in 1990, when I was head of Marlborough Cultural Affairs at the time, it was 1990 was a centennial celebration of Marlborough as a city. We became a city in 1890. And I put out a history magazine, Cultural Affairs put it out, and we did the history back then. And I spent hours upon hours upon hours on a microfiche machine at the Marlborough Public Library. And I got so used to doing that, I could sit there and do it real fast. And at the time where it was set up on the wall right near the desk, across from the desk, people would walk by and they see me doing it and they stand behind me. All of a sudden, I feel someone grabbing hold of me because they're getting dizzy, like they're going to fall over. And they said, "How the heck do you do that?" I says, "Well, once you get going and you do it, you get used to it." That's all I can say. Because I knew what I was looking for, and I would go through the pages that I knew didn't have any history, anything of any importance on it. So that's basically where I got the idea. So I thought it would be a good topic that to bring forth to you people, to give you some insight of how we got started at a very important time in the life of Marlborough in 1890 when we became a city. Because we had grown so much is why we did become a city. But so I promise not to be long. I'm coming off a cold. If I start coughing, you know I'm in trouble. But it's just before we get into 1990, I just want to go briefly over with you some important events leading up to 1890s. The waterworks got completed, giving us water. St. Anthony's School opens, but in the church basement. That was later it would become St. Mary's School up on Broad Street. The electric lights were first turned on, and electric lights first turned on in the city. Here's an ad that was in the business, one of the business directories. Electric lights in your house will not smoke the ceilings, tarnish metals, spoil pictures or draperies, vitiate the atmosphere by giving off impurities, heat the rooms, cost more than other methods of lighting. So I thought you'd get a kick out of that one. Then the post office got started make delivery of mail in 1887, and this was the very first post office, so we think. It's not 100% documented, but it was the Amory Cotton's house on East Main Street, which would be, Dairy Queen would be up this way, Sorin down here someplace. It was right in that generalized area. And that's where the very first post office was. We had a picture of some of the first mailmen, but it was so big we couldn't get it reduced down. It's upstairs in our, what we call our Marlborough room. So unfortunately, it's not in this thing. But St. Anne's Academy opened in 1887, 3 years later. And they too opened in the church basement. They didn't have any buildings back then. So they started the academy. My wife, who's here tonight, she's a graduate from St. Anne's Academy. She didn't start in the basement, though. I can tell you that. All right. The electric street trolley started operating prior to it. And this is actually a Marlborough trolley right here. All right. And that started because of Samuel Boyd, the father of our city. It was his idea. He thought he had the very first electric trolley system in the United States, but he didn't. He got beat out by someone else. But now we get into 1890. What?
Oh, can I say something?
Oh, yeah, I didn't.
There's more than just the 1890 that you're looking at here. Marlborough, at this time period, pioneers in what became the Great Industrial Revolution. That's what made the United States ultimately the leader and the supplier to the world. A lot of inventions were made right here in Marlborough that were adopted internationally that allowed us as a country to become that leader. A lot of the attributes of city life were created right here in 1890 so that people could change from the agrarian style into what became a citified way of living. This is a very significant, important time period for Marlborough because we led this revolution, we didn't follow it.
Thank you. Okay, in 1890, as I said earlier, on July 14th, we became a city with a big celebration. When I was doing that research I was telling you about, I was so excited to find out the Marlborough enterprise had started in a couple of years before 1890. When I got to the library and went to the drawer to get out the microfilm films, the one that covered July was not there because City Hall, Enterprise had had a fire and lost a lot of the papers, and there was different eras of the years that the library had the microfilm of that were missing. And unfortunately, this July was missing. I was kind of hoping to have the headlines and all the pictures and whatever I could out of it. And the only place I could get anything was at the Boston Library, and I got it out of the Boston Globe. There was a story. And it was quite a day. And in 1990, we tried to replicate that. We had all kinds of different things in the celebration. But they did a little bit different than us. They had, the horns blowing, the church bells blowing, firecrackers, small arms. They were shooting off small arms. They had fireworks throughout. There was no regulations on fireworks back then. So they did a lot of things. People were all over downtown. Businesses were illuminated. Fireworks shot across the sky. Red and green fires. They burnt fires. They had speeches. They were famous for making speeches back then. That was part of their entertainment. They would have speakers come in and they'd be speaking all night long probably. The roar of cannon could be heard, and all in honor of Marlborough's step in advance. Speeches were made and music on the high school common. And in 1990, July 14th, we tried to replicate that. We were right on the common, and we had a bandstand set up. We had speakers, and we didn't have fireworks till that night. From back then, we could have the fireworks off of the hill, Fairmont Hill. We can't do it today. But we had tons of things going on. Laser light show. We had electric light parade. We had, when we were doing the speeches, we had as a guest the Lord Mayor of Marlborough, England, and his wife there. And we had a 1,000 balloon release behind the stage come off. And then Remax got into the picture. They had a hot air balloon they used for advertising, and they came swooping over everything with their hot air balloon. So, but it was quite a day. It was a day that we had 40,000 people come to downtown Marlborough to celebrate.
It's interesting that it was July 14th. Bastille.
Bastille Day, yeah. All right, so also in 1890 was our very first city election on December 2nd. Back then, it's like today with the presidential. It was Republican versus Democrat back then. And they elected a mayor, 7 aldermen, and a common council of 14 members. So today the mayor probably complains because he's dealing with 11 city councilors, but back then the mayor had to deal with 21 of them. So I guess he had his hands full. Marlborough Cooperative Bank was incorporated. We all know that's no longer in existence here. And we had, at that time, in the 1890s, we had 9 school buildings. This was the Hildreth School. Back then, the Hildreth School was located on the northeast corner of Church Street, right here, and Hildreth Street, right here. So if you came up off of Main Street, drove up Hildreth, and you come to the set of lights there now, it'd be right there in that corner off to the right, is where the Hildreth School was.
That would be the southeast corner.
No, that's the northeast corner, isn't it? No, southeast corner, you're right. He is right, southeast corner.
What was the population at that time?
Around 13,000, right around there. I forget the exact number, but it was right around there. Bigelow School. Bigelow School, then this was located on West Main Street. This street over here is Mount Pleasant Street, right over here. Hood used to sell Christmas trees right across the street. His house is still there. Hood's house is back in the 1700s, I believe. If Chandra was here, she could tell us in a heartbeat. Oh, there she is.
I think it's late 17 or early 18.
Yeah, there she is, okay. All right, so yeah, there's apartment buildings there now. This is the center school. This building here, I see online all the time. People confuse it. They think it's Gates Academy. It's not Gates Academy. It's what's known as the center school. It was built, the Gates Academy was on this location, and what they did was, it was half the academy and half for the Masonic Lodge. They ripped down that half, the Masonic Lodge, and they sold the other half, which was, when we think of academies today, we think of big academies, you know, like St. Mark's or places like that. Well, they had maybe 7 or 8 students total in it. So that part of it was just like a regular house. And what they did was they sold it at that time. This was in the 1860s. And a fellow named Gate, I think it was Gate, from over in Liberty Street, bought it and moved it over in back of the building that today you probably know is where Arthur Bergeron and Gadboy's offices were. They moved it in back of that. And at the time it was Dr. Campbell who owned the house there. So this was not Gates Academy, this was Marlborough's very first high school. They called it the Center School.
And is
So-
it now, is it still standing?
No, no. They've torn it down. We're trying to figure out when, but. All right, well, our very first mayor was S. Herbert Howe. And if I can find my glasses, I'll tell you about S. Herbert Howe. He owned the big shoe factory, of course, in Marlborough. A lot of people call him the father of our city. I call him the co-father of our city because I really think it was because of Sam Boyd, what Sam Boyd did, that really brought Marlborough to where it was, to become that big, to become a city. And he didn't get to do much in the 1 year that he was mayor. He was just trying to get everything organized because we had just became a city. And so it was very disruptive. So he spent the whole year basically just getting that all done because of the new form of government and everything that he had to deal with that. And he had to deal with, as I showed you, all the aldermen and councilmen and so forth. So it was very hard to get anything done. But he did get sewage. He was really pushing to have sewage in the city because he owned shoe factories and so forth. So he got sewage finally underway, albeit it was just a small part of the city. He got it finally introduced. You got to remember that back in the 1890s, Marlborough was not look like it does today. It was basically the center of Marlborough, maybe up to Lincoln, Broad Street probably to the west, and down to Callery Square, down around Church, where Church comes out onto East Main, and within that, and just north up to, we'll always pass Lincoln Street, and south just down to probably, trying to think of any street that runs up there, just probably a quarter of a mile south of Main Street or so. That was basically where everybody was back then. Later on in the 1800s, they started building some streets up around Church Street and places like that. A lot of the factory owners started building houses. Boyd built them, Howe built them, Fry built them. Fry built them basically up off of Pleasant and Elm, up in that area. And he did it for his workers. So his workers could have places nearby so they could get to work. So it was because of them, the shoe owners, that Marlborough started getting bigger and bigger as far as the population goes, because they were finally getting housing for it. Also in 1891, the Temple Block was built right here. It was, back then, it was a hotel. It was called the City Hotel. And you notice how on that side of Main Street. What do you see all along the whole awnings? They were smart because of all the sun bearing down on them there like that. So that was built in 1891, basically used as a hotel with some stores down here. Yacht races on Lake Williams. Back then they called sailboats yachts. All right, that's what they called them. This picture is a little bit later than 1891 because you could see the standpipe. But like here it says, photo taken later after standpipe was built and before they banned boating, because they banned everything to be used, anything, swimming or whatever in the lake there. But that was funny because when I did a presentation on sports, one of the things I learned was about the yacht races that they had. And they were quite serious. It was on the weekend and there'd be a dozen or so. And then I found out, yacht to us, you know what we think of as a yacht. It'd be too big to fit on Lake. How would you get it on Lake Williams, you know? So then I finally realized there was something of that size there, you know. So, but that was their form of entertainment in the early 1800s. There wasn't much to do, basically, back then. You know, there were some things, but there was roller skating, there was billiards, different things like that. Dancing, of course. One of the biggest things to do in the early 1890s was we had probably 15 of the buildings downtown had halls upstairs. And they'd have speakers come in, bands come in, all kind, play basketball in the halls, and so forth. So that was a lot of the entertainment back then. It was go to listen to speakers come and speak, you know, on different subjects. I know Paul, who's the one on the slaves, didn't he come to talk in Marlborough? I can't think of his name.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can't think of his name. Anyway, someone came to talk. And so that was a form of entertainment back then. So we had, pardon?
Yes, Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass, yep, that's it. That's it, right. So anyways, that was what they did back then. There wasn't much else to do. 1892, the second mayor was sworn in, also a Howe. His name was George Howe. And now both these Howes were Republicans. I don't know, it doesn't say. I think they were probably cousins or something like that. Were they?
Yes.
All right. His big thing was no liquor in Marlborough. That was his big push, was no liquor establishments. And he had a big fight with, well, they didn't call him the police chief back then, but the marshal. And he fired him because he wasn't closing down enough of the illegal places. But the council and aldermen overrode him and hired him back. So that was the big thing back then. Well, that's why they wouldn't have any entertainment at all if they did away with the liquor, I guess. But I put in here just to give you an idea of some salaries, what school teachers made. $288 to $450 a year is what a school teacher made. Principal made about $700-800 a year at the school. That was an average salary in the city at the time. People working in the shoe factories were making even less probably. All right. Main Street was straightened out and leveled. You're going to see a picture later on, and I'll show you exactly what they did. And because Main Street used to have a real sharp curve in it. And even now, if you stood up in front of the Walker Building there and looked down Main Street, you can see it goes down slightly. But it really had a dip in it. And they leveled that off and they straightened it somewhat back then. So Samuel Boyd dies in 1892, the father of the shoe industry in the city. He started the shoe industry back in the 1830s. This was his mansion up on Fairmont Hill. When I did the program on him, I showed this, and then the next picture I showed was what it looked like after a developer bought it and turned it into a 5-family. And then the next picture I showed was a brand new condominium complex. One of the sins of Marlborough right there. That was a beautiful Italianate mansion. And when he died right when the whistle blew at his shoe factory. He died at the exact same time. Imagine that. It was one of the biggest. They shut everything down for his funeral. The schools, everything, all the city departments, everything, town hall, everything shut down. And they were all lined up on Main Street. Now this was on top of Fairmont Hill. And the workers came and they all marched behind the casket, which was on a big glass hearse, sort of pulled by horses and so forth, down Main Street. And both sides of Main Street and East Main Street was lined with people, hundreds and hundreds of people. And he's buried down in the cemetery on Stevens Street. I forget what they call it now. Rock Lawn now, but it was called Chipman back then. Yeah, he's in the old. He's got a big plot at the very end of it. But he did tons and tons of things for the city. It'd take me all night. I did a whole presentation on Sam Boyd a few years ago, and he was very generous. When the troops went off the Civil War, he took care of all their families. He gave them money, bought them food, things like that. So he gave back to his home. He could have went someplace else and made zillions of dollars, but he said, no, I want to stay and help build my hometown. So that was a big loss to the city back then. In 1892, the Warren Block was erected. Here's the Temple Block I showed you earlier. The Warren Block. Both these are still there. This picture is from around the 60s somewhere. We didn't have any picture like from 1890 of it. But any of you been old Marlborough, you might remember this was Delaney's newsstand right there, right there. The stairs that you see now are over here, like that. These buildings are gone, and there's stairs in here. And, well, the stairs are actually there, where that was. And the building, now this is an empty lot. This is where they're going to build a 6-story new building in here, right there. So, to give you an idea. Also in that year, the GAR building, Grand Army of the Republic building, was built right on the corner of Rollins Ave and Main Street. The American Legion were headquartered in there. It also housed the post office right here. That now is a parking lot for Pastimes building. And this here housed the old Marlborough Theater. If any of you remember the old Marlborough Theater. So. And BB's pool. BB's pool used to be in here. No, it was there, it went here, back and forth.
Bill Stevens.
Yeah. All right, so 1893, our third mayor gets sworn in, John O'Connell. That's a very familiar name. He owned shoe factories too. He was a native of Ireland. He came to the United States at the age of 21. Intended on traveling to California. However, he married a girl here in Marlborough and stayed on for the rest of his life. He started as a shoe worker in a shoe factory and ended up owning 2 shoe factories and also a coal company too, besides. One of his favorite philosophies and one he often quoted was, there's a lot of religion in paying 100 cents on the dollar. He claimed he was very critical of the mayors, the first 2 mayors that came before him. He felt they failed in their duty to appropriate sufficient monies for proper operation of city government. And he devised a plan to offer discounts to taxpayers who paid their taxes early. I don't know if it worked, but he gave it a try anyways. And so, as I said, he owned a shoe factory on House Street. You know where the Marlborough Savings Bank is right now? There, O'Connell's shoe factory was there, right at that very spot. All right? The Savings Bank, talking about Marlborough Savings Bank, they built their new building, which this building is still there. They used to be housed a little bit farther up in a small building that Sam Boyd actually donated to them, and the First National. They shared that at one time, First National Bank and the Marlborough Savings Bank. There was a natural history museum. Yes. You might remember. It had a lot of moss on different stuff growing on it. And that's where they originally started. But then they built this building here. I don't know what was going on. Sean, do you remember this picture where you found this picture with all the crowds? Did it say anything at the monument?
I actually had that one for a while. I don't remember, but that is appropriate to the time.
Yeah.
Because it has the fence.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because this says they had a fence around the monument at the time. But it must have been a parade or something, or maybe Veterans Day or something like that, because they're all congregated around there. No, I don't think it's. They're dressed more like for the 1890s. Also in 1893, the Marlborough Hospital opens. This house is still there, although the hospital was torn down, the nurses' home, which a lot of people have come to me about, up there on Union Street. That was built in 1927, that nurses' home. And it was used for the nurses, basically. This house was Sylvester Buckland's house. Sylvester Buckland was the father of our city fire department, way, way, way back. Way back in the days of Paul Wasik. No, he also owned the store down on Main Street. A lot of us knew that store as Cedarlawn's. Remember Cedarlawn's? All right, it was a brick store, had columns on the front at one time. They used to call it the brick store. Sylvester Buckland had built that, and he was the father of the fire department, and he had one of the first fire stations in back of it, and that's where it housed. When I say Paul Wasik, he has one of the old pump. I don't know what it is, a pump or whatever it is, that he restored, and it was housed in that place. But so this was Sylvester Buckland, had lived there. He was very involved with the startup of the hospital and trying to get it going. They were trying for years to get the hospital going. So this house is still there. So if you go onto Hildreth Street, just up past the telephone company, you'll see this White House still standing there. Also in 1893, the Fry Building was erected. We also, a lot of people know it as the Preston Hotel. You can see what it looked like back then. This is definitely from the 1890s. This was a postcard, and you can see the horse and carriage here, dirt, and you see some trolley tracks here. The trolley used to go up Lincoln Street.
So it was built as a hotel?
At one time in the 1890s, we had about 10 hotels in Marlborough. It's almost like it is today. We have so many hotels. Except they weren't big hotels. They were 20 rooms or 15 rooms, and now there are 100, 200, 300 rooms. Also that year, another one of Marlborough's sins, the Fitchburg, we know it as the Fitchburg one, but back then it was called the Boston and Maine Railroad Depot. It was dedicated. Look at how beautiful and ornate this was. We do have some stuff from it upstairs in our Marlborough room. I think it's a mantle from the fireplace and some few other things. They had fireplaces in there, and it was very ornate and beautiful. And yeah, all the stain. We were told that stuff, Brigham took it all out, and it was in his son's cellar down on Stephen Street. We were told that. And then he died, young Ron Brigham, who had the bookstore downtown. And I'm the chairman of the Brigham Family Trust. And the first thing I did was go down to that house to look for those stained glass things. And the executive of the state went, I know nothing. I don't remember seeing any stained glass windows. Where do you think those went? So, but that was beautiful. In the 1980s, when I was community development director, I had, I forget how much, it's been so long, $11 million in grant money to build a park here, a state heritage park here that was going to save this. I started off, I had 9 city councilors in favor and 2 against, and I ended up with 2 in favor and 9 against. Because what happened was they formed a neighborhood association, and at the time there was a couple other neighborhood associations going. Glen Street was one I can remember. Washington Street was another. And they all got together. They said, we'll help you, you help us, and so forth. I went to a conservation commission hearing. There was a small piece of wetland about the size of this room here. And Sasaki Associates was our architect, designer, engineer on the job. And 2 of the engineers came with me, and my office used to be the top floor of the Walker Building. I said, park here, we'll walk down to City Hall. I got down the bottom of the hill, and I looked, and I said to the 2 of them, I said, we're in big trouble. And they said, why? I said, see all those people in front of City Hall? they're waiting for us. And they were. And I had to run the gauntlet. They had people stacked up all the ways up the stairs. And they were calling me every name you could possibly think of. And we got upstairs, and I was the only one to speak in favor, and then the two engineers, of course, were there to answer questions. And about 60 or 80 of them got up and spoke against it. And right at the end, Ed Clancy was vice chairman of the Conservation Commission at the time, and he was holding the hearing. And he said, okay, well, I've heard those for, those against. Is there anyone that just wants anything they want to say before I close the meeting? And this woman says, I want to say something. And she came up to the podium, and he says, well, what do you want to say? And she says, I don't understand you people in this city. Why are you looking at all these dream things to do things like this when we have tremendous problems? And Clancy says, whoa, what kind of problem? She says, up there where we live, we have a terrible vermin problem. And Clancy goes, whoa, time out. I remember you from about an hour and a half ago. You were the woman that got up and told us what a beautiful neighborhood you had. You had beautiful trees and everything was la, so great. And now you're telling me you have a vermin problem there? You know? Didn't matter. They just politically got it killed and it died. That would have been saved. And one of the persons who fought me the most threw herself in front of the bulldozer the day they were going to tear it down to try to save it. A lot of the French people, this is where most of the French people came in, was here. They came in here because they came from the north. This came from the north. You know, we could, because of all the ledge off of Main Street, they couldn't have it connect. So that's why this got built, and they had the trains went up through Fitchburg, up to Vermont, New Hampshire, Vermont, up into Canada, Montreal, yeah. So that's where a lot of the Canadians that came down, the French Canadians came down here and settled. But I remember reading about the pastor up at St. Mary's and some other coming down here to meet the nuns, the first nuns that came. And they had a big celebration. There was about a half a dozen nuns coming down from Canada. And he marched down with all his parishioners, and they had a big to-do about it, and they marched back up the hill to him. So that was heavily used. The Drum and Bugle Corps, the American Legion Drum and Bugle Corps used it a lot. I don't know where they put them, but one of the years that they won the national championship, I think it was the year they won in L.A., they came back, there was 5,000 people there to greet them. And they had a giant, they couldn't get them out of there. The cops were trying them, they wouldn't even leave after the Legion guys were all left. They were partying. There was, a lot of drinking going on. I think you had to go.
Yeah, Bob, so I'm confused. Why did everybody want it torn down?
At the end, you mean? I didn't want it torn down. We wanted to save it.
Right, yeah, but
They thought it would be stayed the way it was. I mean, it was all boarded up. It was a mess. And I said, eventually something's going to happen. And what happened was the people that owned it were developers. And because it was empty and someone had died, you remember there was a bar room on the other corner there. A drunk came out in the wintertime and died in an abandoned car here and died on their property. And their insurance rates, because this was open, went sky high. And I remember they talked to the city way back then, well, if you want to help us out on the insurance because it quadrupled or whatever, went out of sight, then we won't tear it down. And the city said, no, we can't do that, it's private property. So they got sick and tired of paying the ridiculous insurance bill and they tore it down. Matter of business. Yeah, it's too bad. They didn't care. There were people, there were builders, they didn't care about historic value or any of that stuff. So that's what happened. All right, let's move on here, 1894. I'm being told that I'm behind schedule. I have a way of doing that. Okay. William Davenport was the fourth mayor of Marlborough elected, and he was the very first to serve more than one term. If you noticed, all the previous ones only were in there for one term. So he served in 1894 and 1895. He was responsible for a few things. Milham Reservoir was constructed. He was the very first one to appoint a sergeant to the police force. There was just a marshal and police patrolman before that. Marlborough Hospital that I was showing you before closed for a brief period of time, and then reopened later on. And they built a new gas plant down on Maple Street. It would be approximately where the fire station is today, in that general area. There used to be that map that we have here from 1878. You can see it. It was just off of Newton Street and behind Main Street, but just off of Newton Street was where the gas plant was. Very dangerous to have it in that area, I'll tell you. So St. Anthony's finally got a building built in 1894, and they were able to move out of the basement into their building. The second year, he came in to serve. Main Street got paved, and they started building concrete sidewalks, which was a big thing, big to do, especially the paving of Main Street. 'Cause it was all dirt, so you imagine what it was like in the rain and snow and everything. It was terrible. Back then, I don't know if you're aware of this, but how they would do back in 1700s, 1800s, when it snowed out, they had giant rollers. We actually have a picture of one. It would probably be as wide as this room almost. And they'd take about 6 or 8 horses, and the horses would go through the snow, and the rollers would pack the snow right down. And that's how they would plow streets back then. And I found that just by a quirk. I found this picture and shown, because I always wondered, what did they do to get rid of the snow? Well, they packed it down. That's what they did. So if you had a lot of snow, you were probably walking on 2 feet of snow by the time it got done. You know? So he started building he paved it and started building the sidewalks. 1895, he also, the St. Anne's Academy finally expanded. Now, that's not all. They pulled the kids out of all the schools and put them in front to take the picture. They didn't have that many in St. Anne's Academy then, as you'll see a little bit later on. So he also brought the public trolley system to the Southborough line and to the Hudson line. And he fought for appropriation of $500 to build it for a new public school, and won approval on the site of which the present junior high stands on Main Street. So he won approval to build a building there. And after a lengthy battle, he succeeded in winning endorsement of a state highway between Marlborough and Northborough. It's got to be Route 20, but it doesn't really say. So he was still fighting the liquor. Houses of ill fame, he called them. A clergy called them that. A local clergyman claimed from his pulpit that houses of ill fame with liquor law violations and other forms of vice existed in Marlborough. The mayor, in addition to appointing a study group to investigate these claims, offered $100 from his own pocket to anyone who could prove them. No proof was ever supplied. I wonder why. I wonder why. All right, so that was the year the standpipe got erected. I went by there the other day and I looked up at it, and I think we got to come up with a different name than the standpipe. We got to call it the cell tower or the cell phone or whatever. There's so many things up there. It's unbelievable. It still looks great coming down 495 or 290. It's a beacon. People say it to me all the time. I hope the city never tears that down, because I always look for it when I'm coming home from someplace, you know. So, according to the Worcester Daily Spy, they must have been in Marlborough spying in March 18th, 1895. New standpipe. The people of the city are well pleased with the practical completion of the imposing standpipe. It is one of the finest structures of the kind in New England. Cost about $30,000, and it could hold 200,000 gallons. Why did they build that? I'm going to tell you quickly, very quickly, why they built that. They built it because there were a lot of factories being built up on the hill. There was Fry, there was Howe, there was a half a dozen factories. They had no water pressure up there. They couldn't get the water up Lincoln Street, for instance. There was no water pressure. So they built the pumping station that you see on Lake Williams there. and they pumped that up to this reservoir in this pipe, and then that water went up in here, and when they had fires in down at, say, Fry or any of that place down around there, whoosh, down it would come, and that pressure would be in the hydrants to fight the fire. And that's why this got built, you know. So back then, before this, the firefighters would go around the town and dig cisterns and hope that the rain would fill them up so they'd have water in neighborhoods when they went to fight a fire a lot of times, because water pressure was a big problem back then.
So that wasn't for drinking water, that was for
No,
fire?
that was for fire, for the water, in the hydrants. The water you saw in the hydrants. I believe they do. I believe, because of the water pressure situation. It's the same thing with the tanks up on Fairmont Hill. They pump water up into there, and then you get that massive amount of water, and when they open the valve, whoosh, it comes flying out. Here's a ex-fireman right here. That's the way it works, isn't it, Dick? Yep. Yeah. He shakes his head, yes, that's gotta. So, all right, still in 1895, talking about fires, the fire station on Pleasant Street was built. It's hard to see here, but these are horses and wagons here in front. And, but this is what it looked like back then, in 1895, it was built. So, also in 1895, I knew you'd get a kick out of this one. Chandra found this in all her ways of doing these things. I had told her this, that the superintendent of schools urged the parents to halt use of cigarettes by the children. And this was right in the school report I took it out of. And she came up with this clip here of these three guys. Now what they used to do, very interesting, the adults, or whoever the guys were that was doing it, would buy a pack of cigarettes, and then they take it and break it down into 3 cigarettes into a pack. And they sell them to kids like this for 2 cents or 5, whatever it was, and that's how they make money. And that's how nothing changes, right? Nothing changes. A little bit, well, it's not so much regular tobacco today, but it's, back then it was regular tobacco, but this is quite a crew. They don't look like Marlboro boys to me.
That's where you want to live?
1896, a new mayor comes in, Charles Bartlett, all right? He was a baker, had a bakery on Main Street. He lived in a house on East Main Street, right across from where church comes out onto East Main. And he used to do some baking there too. He did wedding cakes at his house, and he had a bakery in downtown. And his big thing was to get a new high school, because they were complaining terribly in that center school. It was so overcrowded, and it was, if they ever had a fire, they never would have got out because they were up in the attic. They were using every inch of space that they could. So he's the one that pushed for it. He was sworn in, and he planned the construction of the school. And most of you know it's called Bartlett Park. It's right on the corner of Prospect Street. The church, IC Church, is right up here. And that's the way it used to look. And again, when I was community development director, that thing was a mess. And I took some HUD money and put it back to this here. It lasted about 2 months, and the kids got a hold of it every time with putting box of Tide in it, this one thing after another, and it ruins it. And we were running out of money to keep fixing it, to keep replacing it. So, and then we had a bubbler. There was a bubbler there, and we got that fixed, and they broke the thing off of the bubbler. I think Joanne and I and the kids, they were little, coming down Main Street, and I saw them up there breaking the thing. I stopped the car, I ran up there, and they're going, it wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me. Like they're the only ones around, there's 4 or 5 of them. It wasn't me. So, but look at how beautiful it was back then. If you could see the fountain, the layered fountain in here, and the park benches and so forth. So that's why that's named Bartlett Park after him. 1896, Dacey Stable dedicated on East Main Street. No, you probably don't know where this is, but do you know where Sperry's Liquors is? That's Sperry's Liquors right there. The stable was actually up in the back, coming in off of from Hilder Street here, the ramp that came up there. And you probably see there's a closed down gas station right to the side. That's the oldest gas station in Marlborough. We put in a couple of proposals to the city about trying to save it and maybe turn it into a mini museum, a shoe museum. Because at the time we had all any of you remember Renzi's shoe repair shop? Well, they had donated the whole inside of the shoe shop to the city. And John Galoni had it in storage and was looking for someplace to put it. And it would have worked perfect in the bay, the repair bay. It was the perfect size for the whole thing. But the city was not interested in doing anything for that. So I don't know what they're going to, probably tear it down and make it into a park. Like we need another park. But yeah, he was one of the, Dacey was one of the originators of trotters in Marlborough down at Trotton Park and so forth. But there was mainly in the back. It was where because in the back there was a ramp because it kind of goes to slope back there up to Hilder Street, and you could go right in from the back. 1896, St. Anne's Academy, first graduating class of 4 girls. Count them. There's one right there, one over here, there's one there, and there's one there. See, I knew who the 4 girls were. This is the same picture you saw from before. But that was their first graduating class of 4 girls. Joe, when you graduated from, how many was in your class? 60. And that was in 1899. We're in separate cars tonight. No, not 1899, 1999. She's 1897, Charles Bartlett serves his 2nd term. And what does he get accomplished in his 2nd term? He gets the contract awarded to build a new high school. This is under construction. You can see the scaffold and everything here. I don't know what these girls are doing. They look like they're playing some game or something. Yeah, it could be. You can see the horse over here, because the main street would have been out here. They didn't have any stone wall in front of it at the time back then. Here is the Marlborough Trotton Park. Chandra found this aerial photo. This is Mill Street. This is Maple Street out here. You know where the foundry is? Foundry would have been around in here someplace, around there. And the Trotton Park was in the back. It's now, I think it's St. Mark's, is it? That it has Faith School, has soccer fields and things like that there. Also in 1897, the Corey Block, which looked like this back then, not like you know it today, had a big fire in what was called the Central House, which was like a hotel, a room and house hotel, sort of. And see this building here? That's this building, and you can see the roof is all collapsed and the windows broken. They had a major fire there back then. This block, I swear, in all the research I did, in over a course of 100 years, probably had 6 to 8 fires in it. I think what happened, because a lot of men, or it was like a room and house, they probably smoked and fell asleep with a cigarette or things like that. But it had more fires, this building. All right, 1898, Dr. Eugene Hoyt sworn in as mayor. He was a surgeon at Marlborough Hospital. He was also the first Democrat to be elected mayor, because all those previous ones were Republicans. As I said, he was a surgeon at Marlborough Hospital. He only served 1 term. Let me see if they say anything else about him. He was notable for laying out several of the main streets we know today, for the first planning of sidewalks in downtown. During his term, it was also established that the common in front of the high school, where the Doughboy Monument now stands, was under the jurisdiction of the school committee. Though it wasn't considered significant at the time, in later years the ruling took on greater importance because there was a group of Marlboroughs who wanted to erect a public comfort station there instead, a comfort station. There used to be in front of well, it would be the corner of Rollins Ave and Main Street, there was a bandstand there, real nice looking bandstand. And that's where they wanted to rip that bandstand down and build a comfort station there. And in reading, they have, the high school back then used to put out this, wasn't newspaper, it was about the size of this here, every month. It was called The Breeze. And they did that for about 6 years, and it was quite informative. It told quite a bit in it. And in 1894, 95, they were complaining about that bandstand because there were homeless people sleeping there, living there. Not much has changed, I guess, but I don't know. And leaving trash behind, things like that. And it was a bad, and they were right there in the center school. Remember me showing you the center school? This was almost in front of the center school. And they put up the bandstand as a barrier to the people coming in and so forth like that. Look, but it didn't work. So, but they wanted to make it a comfort station, and instead of keeping it as a bandstand. And they fought it, and he was one of the main ones to fight it at that time. Now I have this in here because Chandra talked me into this one. The rallying, it's all your fault. No, it's not your fault. The rallying cry, remember the Maine, is struck when the United States battleship Maine explodes and sinks under unknown causes in Havana, Cuba, killing 216. The settlement becomes a rallying point during the coming Spanish-American War. I show you that because Company F goes off to war in 1898. This is Company F here marching to go off for the Spanish-American War. We lost, I believe it was 6 or 8 Marlborough men in that war. One of them died on the transport on the way back, and I think he got lost at sea, if I remember right. And one got buried down in Puerto Rico, but then they went back and dug him up and brought him back to Marlborough. So, so that was one of the big things in 1898, was them going off to the Spanish-American War. Here's the new high school. And you can see they kept the center school up. It was like a junior high school to them at the time. So they kept that up. And this was the first half. In 1927, they tore this down and they built the addition on right here in 1927. So, so this was built and opened in 1898. Nice, pleasant-looking picture. So this is the right side of the current building. Also in 1898, the Middleton block had a fire. We know it probably as the Windsor Hotel. Rollins Ave is right over here. When I was in high school, the Colonial was right here. Anybody remember the Colonial? Luncheonette place. You weren't supposed to go there for recess, but everybody went there. This was one of the Clap Billings shoe factories at the time back then. And look there's a billboard here, down there. And you can tell this is in the winter, see the snow. And they're all standing in front of what we call the Walker Building today to watch the fire. I saw this, it reminded me back when they had the big fire at Fairmont Block. We were coming back up 495, we could see the flames. And we went up and parked up on top of Washington Street someplace, and we were watching, Joanne and I and the 3 little kids watching the fire at the Fairmont, not the Fairmont, Masonic Hall. Yeah, 1974. And that was quite a fire. But that reminded me, because that night there were people, hundreds and hundreds of people watching that fire. So that reminded me when I saw this. All right, in the last year of the decade, Edward Plunkett was our mayor. At 29, he was the youngest mayor. All right. One of his biggest things he got to claim to fame was he enacted a curfew keeping persons on the 16 off the street after 9 p.m.
Why we had the 10 minutes of 9 whistle?
Yeah.
Yep. That's why. And I didn't carry it out here, but we have that whistle. It's out in the back room. It's too heavy. I didn't carry it out here. We do have that whistle. Yeah, we have it here. It's still here. So he enacted that. Now, he was youngest mayor in Marlborough. He was a Democrat. He was a shoe salesman and a stable operator. He was also a bachelor. Though his 2 terms as mayor were relatively undistinguished, it was during his 2 years Marlborough was shaken by a general strike of all local industries, and we're going to get into that next. But he ended up, as he was 29 years old here, he ended up dying at 32. So he didn't have a long life for mayor and everything. We're getting to the end, folks. Also in 1899, O.P. Walker down at Marlborough Junction, he had a factory down there for carriages and stuff like that, built the first Marlborough steamer. And this is actually the first Marlborough steamer. In 1990, Paul Wasik and I tracked this down to a collector up in New Hampshire. We went up to see him, and we told him why we were looking at it, because we wanted to have it in our parade and on display for a while, because we had an automobile show too in 1990. And he says, sure, go right ahead, take it. I says, what? He says, yeah, take it. I said, well, you want me to sign for something? No, you guys look like you're both honest. He says, go ahead, take it. I says, well, I might be honest, but Paul Wasik's not. You know what you're doing?
So who drove it down?
We put it on a trailer. We went back up, put it on a trailer, and brought it down. It was in the parade. We had it in the parade, and we had it. We had a car show that year down. It was called Stratus, which is where Boston Scientific is now, and then we brought it back to him. 1899, the new quarry block was erected. The one that had all the fires found. This is a 1961 photo. We couldn't find anything back in the 1890s of the new one. But as you could see, W.T. Grant Company, anybody, Halon Jewelers, you remember them? Woolworths. Do people know that the insignia is still on the entrance to the building there?
Where was Dr. Kelleher's office?
Dr. Kelleher was right up here, The dentist, my uncle was a dentist, Dr. Wade. Dr. Kelleher, Charles Wade, was right next door to him.
Dr. Walcott?
Dr. Walcott was down at the end, yeah. So, that's Charles, this is Halon, this is Bigelow Shoes over here. Yeah. So. All right, we thought we'd share with you where did you put the other thing? Is it in here? At the end, of course. At the end, of course. We thought we'd share with you some. We have a collection of city directories, they're called, which are invaluable. I can't tell you how invaluable they are. We got them back as late as 1869 or 7. It is. They're kind of scattered. They're not all boom, 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 boom. So in the 1890s, I copied some ads out of the city directories just to give you an idea what was in Marlborough back then. Most of it, as I said, was on Main Street, except the Con Papa. He was on Bond Street. Do you all know where Bond Street is? If you took Lincoln Street all the ways down, I'm going to kill him, down onto Route 20. Before you go on Route 20, there's a road on the right, that's Bond Street. Just before, it's dead ends up there. All right? All right, and you had Fooney Brothers, which was a restaurant. They had a restaurant connected, and they sold cigars, tobacco, and stuff. Same with this guy, Goodrich. He was at 107 Main Street. Sawsville was an importer. Middlesex Towel Supply, Macy and Lyons, the carpets cleaned. They were on Lincoln Street, so they weren't all just on Main Street. Can't find the thing here. Okay, as you see, clothing, canned goods, groceries. There's a lot of grocery stores. They were everywhere back then. Neighborhood grocery stores. There were tons of them. This Brigham and Eager. Brigham and Eager was in the building. You know the building that burnt down not that long ago on Main Street where they're going to build a new 6-story one? That's where they were located, Brigham and Eager. I don't know what, you must, I think.
That's the back of the Main Street.
The back of the Main Street one? Yeah, Main Street Depot. This is in the back of it. Moss and Bigelow. This was around forever and ever and ever and ever. Like he says here, 4 stores in one. This building is still there. Doesn't look like this, but it's still there. This is, you know where the Lofts is, the coffee loft, and it used to be the wire goods. This is right across the street from it. But they covered it with siding. However,
Wait a minute,
Deborah Fairbanks, well,
wait a minute, that's 419 Lincoln Street.
yeah.
The one across from the
Well, you don't go by these things here.
Well, I'm looking
They
at the address.
they change numbers
Oh, okay.
over the years. That's, I found that out the hard way. A lot of the old, because they kept adding longer street, this thing, a lot of different reasons, they renumbered all the things, which throws people like us off all the time. But this is Deborah Fairbanks, who did over the old Marlborough wire goods, went inside there, and she says all this stuff is still there. They just put siding over it. So if someone bought this, they could strip the siding off and be able to go back to that. So that is still there. Now, Bigelow had a big mansion right here where the Shell station is. Another one of the sins of Marlborough. It was a beautiful, beautiful mansion. Ella Bigelow. You probably heard of Ella Bigelow, did the History 1910. She lived in, her and her husband, over here. Here's the Marlborough policeman. Sorry looking lot, isn't it? But they used to, I was reading in my research here how they operated. They had 2 men on from 7 in the morning till 5 or something like that. And then they had 2 men on from 5 until midnight, 1 o'clock, and then in between they only have one man on or something, because they didn't expect any problem that late, but they only had 5, so they had to do something like that, you know. And this is one of the old fire stations. Dick, is that you there? No, that's not you. This was down. They had a firehouse down where Francis Street comes out onto East Main Street. There's an empty hole there now, but they had a firehouse there at one time, and the wagon was pulled by. This is hose number 1, pulled by Jim, one of the retired ladder horses. They had, Marlborough was famous for their white horses that they had that pulled the wagons back then in the late 1800s. This is Babcock's. Does anybody know where Babcock? Here's a quiz. Some people ask me, and I told them already, so don't. Babcock's.
Lincoln Street?
No. It looks like Lincoln, but it's not, but you're close. Those are deer. There's one here, one here, one there, and one here. We went to Marlborough, England in 1990, and they had stores like this in the downtown all over the place with live kill. Huh?
They still live today when I lived there.
Yeah.
So where was it?
Mechanic Street, not too far from Lincoln. Well, it's 74, I think it was, or something like that. But I don't know that, but you can't go by the numbers because the numbers have changed. But I think it was pretty close to the intersection of Lincoln. This is one of the things they used to do way back then in the 1800s. This is the old City Hall, Town Hall, that burnt down in 1902. This was back in the 1890s, though. And these, it's hard to see, but all these bicycles are the ones with the big, big wheels this high. And they were having a bicycle race. There's probably about 30 or 40. They were in the back here and all over the place. And they used to get big crowds, and they used to bicycle. In those city directories, you see more ads selling bicycles. It was unbelievable. So it carries on. But Chandra found a lot of this stuff here, everyday clothing, what the people wore.
None of these clothing ones are.
Well, the next one is fashionable. As you can see, the 1890s. Woo, look at that waist. That's why she's got a white face. She can't breathe. Sporting fashions. Imagine playing tennis in those outfits. And they went to the beach like this here. You could see, and imagine the big bicycles with the big wheels as I was showing you. More photos, statistics, and advertisements. When the telephone came in, most people couldn't afford it, so they put out pay stations. And Marlborough had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 pay stations. And they were scattered throughout the city, mostly in the center, of course, of Pleasant, Mechanic, Lincoln, Main Street. They had one in Fayetteville and one in South Marlborough. So, and then they had them in Framingham. They had 2 or 3 in Hudson. Here's some information during the 1890s, and I left one off, and I'll tell you the name. There's the high school, which was the center school, as you saw earlier. Biggle School, as you saw, Hildreth. Pleasant Street, which ended up being Mitchell School. South Street, which I don't even know where it was down there. Washington Street, which became the Freeman School. The Rice School, which was around Rice Street someplace. Robin Hill School, and there was one on Essex Street too, Essex School. And then they also had evening school at the high school, besides the regular high school classes. The school terms, the public school terms, were the fall, September 5th to December 28th. The winter was January 8th to March 31st. And in the spring, it was April 10th to June 30th. The grammar schools, the fall, they went September 11th, 6 days later, and to December 22nd, 6 days earlier than the high school. In the winter, they went back to school the same time, January 8th, and went to the same time, March 31st. And then in the spring, they started April 10th, but they got out 8 days earlier. They got out June 22nd. The hours back then at the high school, spring and fall, till Thanksgiving, was 8 a.m. to 12:45 p.m. In the winter time, it was 8:15, 15 minutes later they started, and they got out at 1 p.m. I remember that when I went to high school, which is the Walker Building now. That's the time it was. The grammar schools was 8:45 to 11:45, and then 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. is what the grammar school would go. That's what it was like back in the 1890s. All right, here's Fairmont Park, the top of Fairmont Hill. They put a bandstand up there at some time, I believe. I just wanted to show you some of the stuff that they had back then. I think this actually came just after 1900. I think it came, they built it earlier, it got burnt to the ground, they rebuilt it, I should say. But this was right up, Sam Boyd's mansion was just down the street from the entrance to this, right up towards the top where the water tanks would be up here now, that you can see. Okay, here was the train depot, the new Central Hotel, 149 Main Street. These are just some ads. Shaughnessy, attorney, counselor at large, doctor, dentist. There was a ton of dentists back then. And this was Lescure or something like that. I can't read it from here. Bread. He's delivering bread and stuff. Let me see. I meant to tell you that I didn't cover sports, but the only sports that was around back then, Prospect Park was in. Does anybody know where Prospect Park is?
It's in Brooklyn.
Thank you. Prospect Park was built up on top of Prospect, up on Brimsmead, Highland, up in that area. And it was Joanne's aunt lived up there, and her cousin Milden, and he always said he was where second base was. And I've seen plans, I've seen pictures of it, aerial photos of it taken in the 40s. And because I always wondered, how did they play football and baseball on a hill? But they did. Those are the two things that they did. It wasn't up top, they kind of leveled it down somewhat, but they used to play baseball and football back up there. But back during the 1890s, the high school had a baseball team and a football team. 1894, a YMCA instructor came along and taught them about basketball. And from there on, that became a hot thing, basketball. And all those halls that I was talking about that were in these buildings used to be basketball games in there. And that's why the old city hall burned to the ground in 1902, because they had a basketball game up there. And when they left, they forgot to shut off the gas and started the fire. So in 1894, in the Breeze, their magazine, they had a football team. Where do you hear who they played? They played the Collegians. They were all college men. They beat them. They played the Westboro YMCA. They beat them. They played the Natick YMCA. They beat them. The following week, they played a game against the Natics again, but they lost. November 11th, they played Concord High School, and they beat it, who hadn't lost a game in a long, long time, and they beat them. They went to Leominster the following that, and they beat Leominster. And then Leominster came to Marlborough, and they beat them again. and then they defeated the local YMCU. There was the YMCA and the YMCU, I don't know what that is. They beat them. And in the last game, on Thanksgiving Day, they played the junior class of Boston College, and they beat them by 2 touchdowns. So they had a pretty good football team anyways. And they, just quickly, I'll tell you very quickly, that I got a list of blocks and buildings and halls. This is about 20 long, so maybe I won't get into it. What happened there, mister? Oh, I pushed the button, yeah. Get your thing on. All right, while he's searching for the last thing we're going to talk about, there was the Berries block, the Berries Hall, Bijou block, Burke's block, two Burke's blocks, he had 2 of them. Then there was the Clan Nagal Hall, Corey block, Fairmont block, Forest Hall on Lincoln Street, Franklin block, GAR, you saw that building, the Gleason block, Hazelton block, Howe's block, Hurley's block, goes on and on and on. And they weren't just all on Main Street. We had some up on Lincoln Street, and the music hall was on 10 and 12 Fairmont. There was also a theater on Newton Street. If you turned onto Newton Street today, you'd only go a couple hundred feet, and it would have been on the left. There was a theater. It was the first theater they had. And of course, they didn't have moving pictures when they built that. They built that in the late 1880s. And they would have vaudeville, you know, people come in, and they'd have a lot of talks there and things like that too. And then that got torn down, and they ended up building the Marlborough Theater that most of us know about. That was up by Pastimes.
When did they do St. Jean's Block?
When?
St. Jean's.
Oh, there you are.
Corner of Lincoln and Broad.
Yeah, that was built in the 1880s.
The 1880s.
Yeah,
So
at that
had
time.
the
But
dance
that,
and a walk of the dance studio.
oh, that had all up there. That was another one like the Corey block that went through fire after fire after fire. They must have had 6 fires in that building. Yeah, but that did have a block, big block up there, because I remember when I was doing the research on sports in Marlborough, they used to have a basketball game followed by a dance in the hall. And that's how they got people to come to the basketball game. Paul's going to talk on this, but just quickly, it went from November 14th, 98 to May 5th, 99. Over 80% of the employed worked in the shoe industry. One report, as of May 6th, 1,200 people have left Marlborough. 1,200 have gone back to work, and 1,100 still out of work. So a lot of people moved out of Marlborough back then because they had no work. You know, they didn't give them unemployment back then and that type of stuff. So one estimate, 1/3 of the city's population of 15,000 would end up leaving. So Paul's going to put on a very interesting presentation come May. And our presentations are usually the 4th Tuesday of the month, unless there's holidays and stuff like that. So just stay tuned.